And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call as tonight the Indiana Hoosiers take care of business in their first game in the Big Ten tournament, beating Northwestern 71-56. This is a game that Indiana came out and set the tone from the opening tip, playing hard and playing focused on both ends of the floor like we haven't seen them play maybe all year long, and they ultimately end up winning the game by 15. It was really a fascinating game featuring a totally different just defensive intensity from the Hoosiers, some good offense, a complete star turn by one of their freshmen, and, of course, the downside of a big injury to Hunter Mosquera-Perea. And we're going to cover all of that and much more on this episode of the Assembly Call. But, I mean, to start, I think we all agree it's just nice to have a victorious episode to talk about and to really just have an immense feeling of pride about the way the team played on both ends of the floor after a game, because it's been a while since we've been able to feel like that. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. I am your host, Jerod Morris. We have the full crew tonight. Andy Bottoms is here, Ryan Phillips is here, and so we will take you through about the next 45 minutes to an hour breaking down this big IU victory. And to start, as we always do, the banner moment. And, you know, clearly it would be easy to say just the way that Indiana came out playing defense early in the game, because I really think that set the tone for what we saw for the next, the first 8 minutes really set the tone for what we saw over the next 32. But for me, the big moment that stood out to me was in the second half. Northwestern kept making buckets, and they get a stop here or there. Indiana really didn't play very good offensively for about the first 8 minutes of the second half. And it was 49-38, and you kind of felt, you know what, if Indiana's not careful and Northwestern gets a couple buckets and a stop, they could get back in this thing, and it'll be a dogfight. And so Northwestern gets a bucket. It's 49-38, and James Blackman Jr. goes down and drains a three. A couple possessions happen, and then the next possession, James Blackman Jr. drains another three. It puts Indiana up 17, and that really was the dagger, because Northwestern was never again able to get it, I don't think, under 13 or 14, and it was just a continuation of a scintillating day from James Blackman Jr., who scored 25 points. He was 5 of 10 from downtown, but more than the points even, because we've seen that from him before, was the overall activity. He had 6 rebounds, 4 of them offensive, and there were at least 3 possessions I can remember off the top of my head where he missed a shot, grabbed the rebound, kept the possession alive, and it resulted in an Indiana bucket. Because Indiana, for as well as they played today, it wasn't as crisp an offensive performance as we're used to seeing. But the fact that they were able to keep getting offensive rebounds, 20 overall for the game, really helped them to keep momentum going, even when otherwise they might have gone into an offensive drought like what we saw in that second half of the Northwestern game. And I thought James Blackman Jr.'s activity really helped with that. So he was terrific, but I thought those 2 3-pointers he made, it was almost like him stepping up and saying, look, we've played great. Let's just end this right now, put our foot on their throat, don't give them a chance to come back. And when you have a guy like that, a freshman who seems to be maturing into a sophomore here right before our eyes in a big moment for the Hoosiers, that's huge, because this is what he was billed to be. We've seen him be somewhat up and down. Before the game, I tweeted that I didn't think that James Blackman Jr. or Robert Johnson would have a good game because it's their first Big Ten tournament. They're playing in a big arena, which is hard to shoot in. They haven't been very consistent. They've been better at home. And they took all those reasons, balled them up, threw them in the trash, and went out and played terrific basketball, both of them, but James Blackman Jr. especially. So for me, that's the banner moment for the way that he stepped up, and especially those 2 big shots. But clearly for Indiana to win a game like this, there were a lot more guys who stepped up, and we'll break all of those down as we go throughout the program this evening. So let's go around the horn with the rest of the crew, and let's get their opening thoughts. Andy, we'll start with you with your bottoms line on tonight's IU victory.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted this at halftime that if you could summarize it in one word for me, it was effort. I thought the first half was all about effort, both defensively, rebounding. Ended up IU had 20 offensive rebounds for the game, so they rebounded 50% of their own misses or somewhere thereabouts. And to me, that's certainly an area they exploited when they played Northwestern the first time. I think we touched on that a little bit a couple nights ago, but I just thought, those kinds of hustle plays, effort, running down missed shots. You mentioned Blackman doing that. Defensively, when they got in man, it was one of those things where our good friend Dan Dockage, had a good point and just rammed it into the ground in terms of how much it seemed to energize them playing man-to-man defense. But I did agree with it. It was just, once I heard him say it the first 61 times, it got to be a little much. But I did agree with the general sentiment. And I thought, one thing Crean had said at some point over the course of the year was that this team really seemed to generate its confidence from making shots. So generate its defensive intensity and confidence from making shots. And tonight it seemed like the other way around, where they really generated their energy and effort and enthusiasm from playing good defense, and that led to that 21-1 run that turned a 5-3 deficit into a 24-6 lead. And that really, it was a lot of trading baskets at times. From there on out, there were a couple good runs. Northwestern, kind of pushed it close to the 10-point range. IU always seemed to answer. That one stretch you mentioned was a good one, but I thought it was all just how they set the tone with the effort. And I don't know that they sustained it as well as maybe everybody would have liked in the second half, but I think certainly for a team that was coming into this pretty fragile, I guess is the word that I used earlier, they didn't look it early on, and I think some early success on the defensive end really helped get them jump-started, and certainly will be something they're going to need to do tomorrow against a much tougher offensive opponent.
Ryan, do you have anything to rant about after this performance?
It can be a positive rant. I just think that finally we saw the fight that I've been begging for the last couple weeks out of this team. It seemed like they really cared about this game and cared about winning this game, and that was true from the opening tip. I mean, they were just in the game on both ends, really just aggressive and fighting, and it's that fight we've wanted from them. It was not evident in the second half against Northwestern. It was not evident against Iowa. And then at times against Michigan State. I mean, there was a good 15-minute period against Michigan State where they just didn't look like they cared. And, I know that's not the case. I'm sure they cared, but they just didn't seem to want to put the effort in necessary to win the game. And I thought that first half was as well as this team has played from an effort standpoint this year. Like Andy said, the offense, or like you said, I think the offense wasn't as crisp, and they only shot 41.5% from the field, but they dominated the game because of their effort. I mean, they played much better defensively. They grabbed offensive rebounds. They weren't, even the rebounds that Northwestern got defensively, almost all of them were contested. There wasn't a single one that was just an easy rebound. There was always somebody there in fighting for it. And when you look at also another thing that I thought was really, really important was the fact that with an offense against the zone, you've got to move the basketball, and you're going to make shots off movement. And they had 19 assists on 27 shots, or 27 made field goals. And that is huge because it means they were moving the ball. They weren't just driving into the teeth of the defense and looking to pass it out where they came from. They were looking to actually do something with it once they got there. And I thought that was probably the most important part. They were aggressive and attacked on both ends of the floor. There were lulls in the second half, as Andy said, of course. It wasn't the greatest performance ever, but it's a great step for this team to get back on the right track by playing that way with that kind of heart and effort.
It's funny. Indiana's last game was against Michigan State, and it's a game that featured Michigan State doing a lot of the little things, the little tap-out rebounds and offensive rebounds and making hustle plays. And it's almost like Indiana just channeled what they saw from Michigan State into tonight. And that's the most impressive thing about this because, as impressive as the big win over Maryland was when Indiana just goes crazy from three-point range and the Minnesota win and some of the bigger wins this year, there was just something different about this one that folks who have watched this team game in, game out, we all saw it. It was that extra gear. I mean, we were denying passing lanes in the first half. When have we seen that all year? And the defense really did seem to energize this team. And I know sometimes y'all think I'm crazy with some of the stuff I spout about reasons to be optimistic, and sometimes I am. But, as I said after the Michigan State game, one of the reasons I felt positive going into this one is I just felt there was a negative feeling in Assembly Hall, it felt like, the last few games. And I thought actually getting away from home and getting past the regular season, almost getting a fresh start might help this team. And, of course, that's all conjecture on my part, but it proved true in this game. I think that's what we saw. And in the pregame with Fish, he asked Tom Crean, what do you think is the attitude of this team? And, I mentioned this during the halftime report. You have to take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. But when Crean said, love it, speaking of the attitude, the guys are rested, we're ready to go, we're mentally prepared, there was actually something about the conviction he said it with that I was like, damn, all right, maybe this team really is ready to play, and it bore itself out on the court. So I think what you saw today was, for the first time in a while, a team that really seemed to be on the same page from coach to player, and it's been so long since we've seen that, and man, when you do that, you go out and you play really good basketball. And that's been the frustration for Indiana fans, is we haven't seen it. We saw it today, and it's the kind of performance that if we can carry it into tomorrow against Maryland, hey, that's a team that we can beat. That's not a team that poses great matchup problems even without Honor, because we beat them once before without Honor. Now we'll talk about some complications there coming up, but you got to be feeling good. So Andy, before we go further, let me bring you in here and let's just get the latest up to the second bracket type stuff, because obviously a couple bubble teams lost. Illinois lost, Texas A&M lost, Indiana wins. Do you have any different feeling now about what this particular win does for Indiana? Are we closer to being in without winning tomorrow? Do we still need to win tomorrow? What's the latest?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say they're closer to being in because there are, those teams you mentioned lost, and I think that certainly helps. One of the, big things is how some of these other teams that were behind them played. So you've got the ones that you said lost. So Texas A&M lost, Old Dominion lost, Illinois lost. I feel like there's another one that I'm not thinking of that lost even already today. You've got UCLA is another one. They won, but they really didn't make up any ground because they played USC again, and they play Arizona tomorrow, so that doesn't seem to be a game they're going to win. One of their better players, I think, got hurt and at least missed part of that game. So, those kinds of things, as much as you don't want to be in the position where you're hinging your hopes on how other teams are playing, kind of is where IU is right now. So we have to make the best of that. Texas is playing well right now. They're up on Iowa State, the last that I saw. So that certainly helps their case a little bit. They're in a similar boat. But I think in general, things have broken relatively well for IU today when you consider what other bubble teams have done. So I don't know. I haven't gone to really sit down and figure out where that pushes IU. I think it pushes them a little bit further away from the cut line because I think people want to see signs of the team that beat the good teams that are on here. I mentioned this the other night. There aren't many teams that you can point to that are around the spot on the bubble where IU is right now that have the higher end wins that they do. The problem is that the team that's been showing up the last 2 months doesn't really look like a team that can do that. And so, for better or worse, you're not just sliding somebody a piece of paper and with numbers on it that says this team has X number of wins against the top 25 or the top 50 and whatever it is, because if you did that, certainly IU would be in. The problem is that they've looked anything but capable down the stretch, and so this was at least a step in that direction. It was, a way to, if you want to take this to the nth degree, say that, losing to Northwestern, which is really IU's only bad loss in terms of RPI, was a bit of a fluke. Now we can argue whether it was or wasn't based on how the team was playing at the time, but at least you can make it look that way. So I think it helps their case that they eked by in this game. You really haven't silenced any question marks about how this team is playing. So I think they were able to do a bit of that, and I think it gives them, I guess, a little more margin for error tomorrow. I guess I would say this: if this team beats Maryland tomorrow, they're in without a doubt. If they lose in a close game, I think now this gives them at least a little more breathing room where you can afford to have one of those type things. You show up and you play well, and you show that for a couple games. And this team hasn't played 2 good games in a row. Certainly hasn't won 2 games in a row in a while, and really hasn't played 2 good games in a row in quite some time. So, again, you want to use the eye test and things like that, where some of the subjectivity comes in. I think if they show up and play really well, that will definitely go a long way toward helping. I'm definitely not at a point of saying they can lose tomorrow and still get in. But I do think they gave themselves a little bit of extra breathing room based on both how they played tonight and how other teams around them on the bubble have played during the day and even a little bit yesterday.
A quick programming note. So assemblycall.com/subscribe, our email list. After every game, we send out a post-game email the day after. Those of you who subscribe know that. If you're new to us, go there, subscribe. But I do want to let you know that there's a chance that tomorrow's email could be without Andy's typical lineup analysis when it comes to March and its bracket stuff. We allow his priority to be the bracketology stuff. So if he can do the bracket and the stats, he'll do both. If not, he's going to side toward the bracket, and we'll get a bracket update in the morning. and the email will have that, but it won't have the stats. So just to let you know, that's what may be showing up in your inbox tomorrow morning. The tournament gets crazy, and hopefully we have like 3 more straight days of this, which would be an insane schedule and awesome, and we would love it. And with that said, Ryan, you wanted to jump in here on the bubble stuff.
Yeah, I think that people have to appreciate how great things fell for IU in the draw. I mean, beating Northwestern is a huge deal in my opinion because that's, as Andy said, that's Indiana's worst loss by far, and it happened on the road and on a neutral court. They were able to thrash Northwestern. So even though it, like we said, it's not really the case that maybe they win that game on a neutral court. There's no way they would have won that game the way they played. But it certainly helps to X out one of your losses. I mean, it's better than meeting Nebraska or Minnesota or Michigan, teams you already beat. I mean, this kind of, it doesn't wipe out that loss, obviously, but I was saying on Twitter, I think it helps to mitigate it when you can say, oh, well, we lost on the road, and then at neutral court, we pretty much dominated them. So, that certainly helps. And also the fact that not only that we drew Northwestern, which I think people were a little hesitant at because we played so horribly against Northwestern the first time, and some were probably hoping for Minnesota or Nebraska. But the fact that we drew Northwestern and then we get Maryland in the second round is, I mean, it could not have fallen better for Indiana. So whatever magic was going on there, it's perfect if Indiana needed to use this tournament to get into the NCAAs. And obviously they come out like they did tonight. Who knows what happens tomorrow against Maryland?
So I want to talk about Hunter. Let's get to that in a second. There's so much to talk about from this game, and I want to keep the focus on the defense because it is the story tonight, the way Indiana played defense. I mean, I don't know if you all have looked at the stats, but Indiana held Northwestern to under a point per possession, which is crazy for this team. I mean, we've seen Indiana play good defense in the first half, but it's almost always been followed up by a horrible second half of defense, and that didn't happen tonight. They really kept up the defense for the most part. And the biggest thing Indiana did tonight was they guarded the heck out of Trey Demps. This is a guy who, earlier this year when Indiana played Northwestern, Demps went off for 23 points. In 2014 when they played him, he scored 19 points. And he's had a couple other good games against Indiana too. And what we saw tonight was guys like Yogi Ferrell just straight up denying him the ball and just not letting him do anything. And, I mean, really basically making the night just hellish on Trey Demps, and I thought that was such a big key because he's been such a big part of Northwestern beating Indiana. As we know, Northwestern had won 8 of the last 12 matchups, and Trey Demps had been a big part of that the last few games. And I thought clearly that was a focus, that was part of the game plan, and Indiana's ability to come in and lock a guy up like that, I thought was really, really impressive. So, before we move on, I just want to make sure that we highlight this defense. And I know that, in a normal season, you're not going just crazy because Northwestern, scores barely less than a point per possession. But for this team, for this season, the timing, everything that was on the line, it's really impressive. And I think it's something to celebrate and talk about. And it's nice to see, Tom Crean said, this was a couple weeks ago, he said, I don't believe that you are what you are. However it was phrased, he said he doesn't believe that. And unfortunately, this team had kind of been showing that it was what it was. But tonight, it showed that, hey, maybe a team can turn over a new leaf come tournament time because Indiana certainly seemed to do that tonight. Andy and Ryan, both, we'll start with Andy, but just in terms of tactics, what did Indiana do differently tonight? We talked about picking up more man. But was it as much the tactics or simply the focus and the effort that they played with, or was there something else specific they did that contributed to this great defensive effort?
Yeah, I mean, I thought on Demps, I thought Yogi was just fantastic on him, both on and off the ball. There were, a time when you could tell Demps just wanted to get in and shoot. Ended up taking a really bad shot, tried to bank it in, and ended up banking it over the rim. And I thought, Yogi just really forced him into a tough shot. There was another time I think that he just almost took a three-pointer in the first half just to take a three-pointer, and I thought Yogi was just tremendous on him. I thought Robert Johnson did well throughout, really harassed McIntosh and Sobolewski when they were in there. And there was a time, I mentioned this on Twitter, that IU was trying to get into zone, and Johnson was so intent on picking up his guy. He just wasn't. Now this is not ideal that he didn't understand what everybody else was doing, but he was so intent on picking up his guy at half court that he picked him up, and you can hear the bench yelling at him that they're trying to back into a zone. So I kind of like seeing that intensity and that willingness to really go out and pick guys up. And so I thought that was part of it. They really didn't press like we talked about. There were a couple times that they, would guard guys up the floor, pick them up a little earlier, but they didn't press like we at least hypothesized that they might. I thought they also did a little bit better job with some of the ball screens out top. There were a couple times that they let a lot slip to the goal, but in general, that's not something they've defended well this year, where they really, either hung back too low, or there wasn't good communication where the guy slipped to the basket and both guys stayed with the dribbler. So I thought some of those things were better, but I do think a lot of it was just about intensity, because you still saw a few of those lapses, and there's still things that this team's just not gonna be able to do offensively. But I definitely thought playing more man, it seemed like less switching within the same possession, which I thought was helpful, because we talked before about they get these mid-possession switches and guys get confused. So I didn't notice that too much at all today. So I think that was a positive and contributed overall to a pretty good defensive performance. Looking, I pulled this stuff up the other day. IU had only held 3 Big Ten opponents under 1 point per possession, and 2 of those came in the first 3 games of the conference season against Nebraska and Ohio State. So, 1 out of their prior 15 games, so they held somebody even below, I think 1.05 was the lowest they'd been, and that was that abomination at Rutgers where they're, won by 30. So you can argue that's not even against a real team, but definitely a good sign. This team's never going to be elite defensively, but as we've talked about all year, when the offense is playing well, they can settle for average, and that can be good enough. So I thought they were a bit better than average tonight, and like I mentioned before, certainly something they're going to need to carry over, and a lot bigger challenge to maintain that against Maryland. But at least a good sign that guys seem to take a bit more pride in their defensive effort than we've seen over the last month or so, I'd say.
Andy, your dry sense of humor is by far the most underrated aspect of the assembly call. There's no question about it. So, Ryan, picking up on the defensive topic, I thought Robert Johnson was really good tonight. And it's not going to show up in the stat sheet. He had 6 points, he had 3 boards, a couple of assists. But I thought the way he came out, Fish talked about on Dokic's show, actually, maybe it was last week, that he's been getting basically daily or even twice daily treatments on his leg since he slipped and fell against Ohio State. And I actually, I'm such a nerd that I went the other night and actually analyzed the stats pre the Ohio State game and after, and you can see a significant dip in his production, especially rebounds. I think the 10 games before the Ohio State game, he was averaging 5.5 rebounds a game, and since then he's averaged about 2. And his shooting has been down, assists have been down, everything's been down. I thought he came out today and looked quicker, more decisive, and just more active overall, and I really thought his activity helped set the tone early. And defensively, I thought he was really good. So, speak about him, and then also just in general what you saw from the Hoosiers defensively.
Well, we know that Robert Johnson has the potential to be an excellent on-ball defender. And, as weird as it may seem, one of the hallmarks of Tom Crean's Marquette teams was very strong on-ball defense, and particularly on the perimeter. And I think that he's more a type of guard that Crean would like, a well-rounded guy who can sort of do a little bit of everything. But, yeah, I thought he looked much more into it today and maybe not focusing as much on something that's hurting him. Sometimes when you're a young guy who's hurting, you let that take your mind off of what your assignments are and what your job are. And the effort's been there from him defensively all year. But I also thought James Blackman Jr. showed up playing defense tonight. And, especially early. I thought late he kind of fell back into doing some James Blackman Jr. things defensively. But from the get-go, he was picking guys up right at half court. He was up on them. Even if you're not a great defender, if you make the guy with the ball in front of you think you are, or at least, think that he's going to get harassed on the way to the basket, then you've won half the battle there. I also thought Hunter and Troy Williams both played really well, especially early as rim protectors. And you saw, I think, that Troy had 3 blocks, and Hunter had 1 as well. But they also altered a lot of shots just with their athleticism. I mean, you don't even have to be a great defender to alter a shot, using athleticism and length. And I thought both guys really committed to the defensive end tonight. And Troy had 12 rebounds, 7 defensive, 5 offensive. So they were both clearly engaged, and while their stat lines weren't as gaudy as we've seen in the past, they both had a huge impact on both ends of the floor, I thought.
Yeah, and let's hold that thought on Troy because I want to talk about him. I thought, he was very active, made some really poor decisions. We'll get to him in a minute, but let's talk Hunter. And there's a couple different angles for this conversation about Hunter. And the first one, look, do you guys want to vent real quick just about how silly it was that Alex Ola basically flopped and that's what ended up causing the injury? Because I'd like for us all to just vent and get that the hell out of our system because that sucked. And it's a damn shame that Hunter had to get hurt on a play like that. So here, you guys take the floor. That was Andy. Go first.
Yeah,
I mean that's terrible.
Yeah, anybody who has watched college basketball much this year, it's been such a big topic. I don't know if it was Mike DeCourcy. I know he uses it a lot. The term charbage, to pull charge and garbage together, which I think that was just another great example. I honestly didn't even realize amidst all of that Johnson had gotten called for a foul because when they showed it, he had clearly slid over. Not to mention the fact that he's this 7-foot, 280-pound dude who's probably not going to just go flailing back with no control over his extremities whatsoever while he takes somebody out. And the worst part is it continues to happen because these idiot referees reward it by giving fouls on it, so everybody does it. It's the same way that a ball handler is throwing their head back and doing this every time somebody gets touched, which IU could have done today given the way Northwestern was giving forearms to every ball handler that had to touch the ball. But, again, it's a case where coaches are going to teach it because it's going to get called, and so people can get pissed about it, and it sucks that guys get hurt. But part of it has been the way the game's been officiated that has really encouraged it to continue. And so players see that, they understand. They've played 30 games this year and understand how it's been officiated, so they're going to continue to do it. And obviously kind of a freak thing, and certainly terrible. We can get into more of the aftermath, but I'll let Ryan chime in on the brilliance that was that call.
Yeah, frankly, I thought that was going to be your rant, Ryan.
I almost went there, but I wanted to start with something positive. But oh my God, Alex Ola has 100 pounds and 9 inches on Robert Johnson, and he must be light as a feather because he went flying backwards like he'd been hit by a meteor. It was, seriously, and I've said this before. This is completely 100% the fault of Mike Krzyzewski, who in the mid-'90s realized he could not teach defense. He realized that after Christian Laettner and Grant Hill and those guys left, he realized he could not teach defense, and so he taught guys like Shane Battier and whoever else was there, Jason Williams and that group of guys, and of course Steve Wojciechowski, how to fall over when a guy dribbled anywhere near you and get a foul call. And he would work officials, and that's when this whole charge block thing started. And now nobody knows what the F to call. That contact was Alex Ola's fault. He slid over late under a small guard and flies backwards like I said, like he's been hit by a cannonball. And Hunter is the innocent bystander who gets whacked in the leg. Now, Ola didn't mean to hurt Hunter, obviously, but there are consequences to this shit. And I'm tired of it. I'm so tired of it. It is completely Mike Krzyzewski's fault. Nobody did this before him. And I've complained about IU doing it this year, where there's a breakaway, a one-on-one breakaway, and a guy will stand there like a statue, and someone will go right by him for a layup. It's the dumbest thing ever. Play defense. Alex Ola could have rejected that shit, could have knocked that pass away, and it never would have happened. But instead, he goes to try and draw a foul, and somebody gets injured. It's the most predictable thing. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often.
Second most underrated element of the assembly call is when Ryan gets worked up about officials. And thanks for cursing, so now I have to mark this as explicit in iTunes. Really appreciate that.
You can bleep me, come on. It doesn't take that much work, Morris.
All right, so, watching the images of Hunter laying there were heartbreaking. And probably the worst was they actually showed dear Marnie Mooney, Indiana's academic advisor, up in the stands, and you could just see the hurt and the pain on her face watching one of her boys laying out there. And they showed the overhead shot of Hunter's face, and you feel so bad because he's battled back and he's really made improvements, and I thought he did some good things tonight. And I'm just going to say this right now. If you are expecting any type of realistic outlook on Hunter's status over the next few days, you're not going to get it, and it's the smartest thing Indiana can do. There is absolutely no benefit to Indiana of releasing any information about Hunter's knee injury, so you're not going to get it because they're not going to want the committee to know anything about it, and that's smart. All I'm going to say is, and Andy or Ryan, you guys can chime in here if you want to, to me, if you didn't see it, it looked bad. When it happened and watching it on the replay, it looked to me like a guy who's going to be out for a while. And the look on his face when he was walking back out, it has all the earmarks of being an injury that's going to take a while and that we won't see him play again. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we do see him. They said they're not going to do x-rays or do an MRI tonight and wait overnight. I don't, whether that's a positive or a negative, I don't think it really matters. But certainly it's hard to imagine him getting back out there on the floor. Do either of you guys disagree? I mean, I don't want to be the only voice on that.
No, I think that Indiana immediately said, they didn't say there's going to be no MRI or X-ray tonight. They said no MRI or X-ray needed, which I think again is, like you said, them just being quiet about it. If they do something, they don't need to release it publicly. There's no rule that says you have to tell everybody what an injury is or something like that. That's a courtesy coaches do for the media. So yeah, do not talk about it with anyone. Keep it a secret. Then you can release the information on Monday, whatever. But I will say that I thought that even though Hunter was out, I thought Emmett Holt played a hell of a game. I thought he really stepped up, worked his butt off on Ola, even though he gives up half a foot to the guy. And I thought Troy Williams, as I said earlier, helped coming over a lot and rim protecting. So, the team kind of banded together after that and didn't let it impact them. I mean, seeing one of your teammates down like that, and Hunter was on the court screaming in pain. It did not look good, and the team really rallied around, I thought. And a lot of times that can completely change the momentum of a game. It can just take the life out of a team, and I thought that they kind of regrouped, settled in, and guys like Hartman and Holt and Troy really stepped up to fill that role and keep things from getting out of hand on the interior.
Hey, let's talk about Emmett Holt in a second. Andy, realistically, how's the committee going to look at this? Because obviously it's an important injury, and even though Indiana had some success without Hunter, we all talked about how clearly this is a better team with him. And yet, the evidence, you look at it, hey, Indiana beat Maryland by 19 without Hunter. So is this going to be the kind of thing that, that they look at and they dock Indiana? Is it neutral? I mean, how much does this stuff factor in?
It's one of those things that's a little bit nebulous, quite honestly, how much they use it. So they say they take that into account, and I think that that's fair and that they do. I think the challenge becomes situations like this one where, you have something to fall back on with how this team played without somebody. So I think I mentioned this. We were talking about Illinois the other night. You could look at it and say, well, Ravonte Rice was out for a while. But Illinois actually had most of their big wins when he wasn't in, particularly in Big Ten play. So I don't think in this case it's a huge factor. I know last year, as an example, this is really a more extreme case. So BYU, Kyle Collinsworth and their team, who's had, I think, 6 triple-doubles this year, so a really good player, and he tore his ACL in the West Coast Conference Tournament in a game they lost to Gonzaga. And they were a team that at the time was kind of on the bubble, maybe a little bit, inside of that first 4 territory. But there were a lot of folks, myself included, who thought, if the committee really looks at this and takes it literally and says, what would this team be like without this guy? They're probably not a tournament team. And they got in pretty safely. And looking back now, they were a 10 seed, I think. So I guess that's probably the most recent and probably not even the most relevant example, because we've had other opportunities to see IU play without Hunter this year. So I don't know that in this case it's a huge deal. Because in that case, they announced pretty early on that Collinsworth was done. He had torn his ACL, and they knew he was going to be out. It was clear he wouldn't play in the tournament. So there wasn't even any of some of the mystery, I guess, that at least at this point surrounds Hunter's situation. So I think it actually, in some ways, is kind of a good thing that they've seen that this team has played without him so far, because they've acquitted themselves well when he wasn't in. And while I agree with you, and what we've seen is that, over the past little while, he's played pretty well. But when you look back at, they played 7 games completely without him, and then the Michigan game when he came back, he only played 4 minutes. So essentially, you played 8 games without him. They were 5-3, and beat one at Illinois, beat Ohio State, beat Maryland, beat Michigan at home. So so they had some decent wins and performances without him. I think in some ways, looking at their record with him probably belies his importance to the team, but I don't think it's a huge factor in the eyes of the committee at this point, based on, I guess, recent experience.
Breaking news: Texas lost.
Yeah, they blew a fairly big lead. I would have been watching it had our TV not broken where I usually record this. So Iowa State had a pretty big comeback, and so I don't know if that knocks Texas out. but it certainly helps the case of, they've got 3 good wins, but they've also lost, I think, a dozen games to the other teams in the top 50. So it's not a bad thing for IU by any means, because if they had beaten Iowa State, as I think I mentioned earlier, they would have been in for sure.
Yeah, to talk about the committee and Honor and how that's going to impact, I mean, let's be real here and back off. I realize that Tirico and Dockich had to have something to talk about because it really was a pretty dominating performance by IU, but it's not like Indiana lost Troy Williams or Yogi Ferrell. They lost Hunter Perea. Yeah, it impacts the team, and we all know that Hunter is very important to this team, especially if they play anyone with a legit post threat. But at the same time, if they're looking at numbers and haven't watched the team closely all year, they're not going to see it as, oh my gosh, this is a game changer. So I think that we have to dial down what we think the committee will do on this. They could just look at our lineup and be like, oh, well, they have another 7-footer, this kid named April. He's sitting on the bench. I'm sure they'll be fine. So you never know.
Turnaround jump shot, baby.
You never know how the committee is going to look at things. So, no, but I mean,
the athletic
obviously,
department's going to be tweeting out a YouTube video of that turnaround jumper just so people can see it again. I can't wait for that.
Photoshopping.
Somebody get a vine of that out there so that we can get this in the hands of the right people.
Somebody get it. Come on, we've got a great telecom department. Somebody cut in and make it look like he's doing against different teams, and it's So and throw in some really good rap music behind it, make it look like an N1 mixtape. It'll be great. I think we can't assume what the committee is going to do. But you're right though, Andy. You never know how heavily they're going to weigh that kind of thing. But I just think that it's probably our number 5 starter, not our it's not like it's one of our top 2 guys. So we've got that going for us at least.
Hey, you want to know why I hate the Big Ten tournament, other than the fact that we haven't played well in it over the years, is the last 2 times that we have played well, which is this year. Obviously, we played very well against Northwestern and won by double digits. And back in 2012, the Oladipo sophomore year team, Indiana beats Penn State 75-58, but Verdell Jones gets hurt. So when we do actually play well, a really important player gets hurt. Not the top-level guys. It wasn't Oladipo or Zeller, but Verdell Jones was a really important player on that team for all the grief he took. He was a really good player as a senior.
Especially that season. Yeah, no. That was
and him important. Not being there against Wisconsin really hurt Indiana. So, Big Ten tournament. I don't like you. I don't like you. When Indiana finally does play well and you make us deal with this stuff. But that's all right. You know what, Hunter? What?
I was just going to say, let's not forget Victor Oladipo's 360 dunk against Illinois the next year, though. I mean, come on, that was fun, right?
Yeah, yes. That was. But the injuries. But, Hunter, Hoosier Nation has your back. We hope that you're doing well. I hope you come back this year. I really hope I'm wrong about what it looked like. That's just, and again, I only gave my 2 cents on what it looked like because we're not going to hear anything about the injury if Indiana's smart. So, but hopefully we see him back. So let's.
Another thing to say about that. Thank God he had a knee brace on, because if he didn't, his leg would have snapped. I mean, that's how hard he got hit, and thank goodness that was his already injured leg with a knee brace on, because it could have been much, much, much worse without that.
Yeah, no, you're right. All right, so there were a couple of things I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about Emmett real quick, and then we'll get to Troy. I know that Dockich and Tirico wanted to make it sound like tonight that they kind of discovered Emmett Holt for everybody, like he was this secret that no one else knew about. But we've seen Emmett play better than he did tonight as long ago as the Pittsburgh game, if everybody remembers. Emmett has shown all year that he's got good instincts. He's a smart basketball player. He's actually a more natural basketball player than Hunter is. He just doesn't quite have the size, the wingspan, and the athleticism, obviously, and some of the experience that Hunter has. But he's a smart, instinctive basketball player. Emmett's issue has been consistency. We've seen flashes like what we saw tonight from him, but then he'll go a couple games without really getting involved in the action. Now, he doesn't have that luxury anymore because he's going to have to step up and play because, frankly, look, Colin Hartman said he was close to 100%, but he played 13 minutes today. He had an assist and a couple of fouls, and that was it. And he did have a couple possessions where he D'd up Alex Ola real well in the first half. In fact, he played as good a post D on Alex Ola as anyone did in the first half. But the thing with Hartman is he wasn't even the same player before he got hurt. we were starting to see. We had a couple conversations here on postgame shows that, hey, does it feel like Colin's slowing down a little bit? Like maybe the knee's getting a little worn down, and so I think Hartman's presence is very important. Don't get me wrong. But to expect him to be able to go back to what he did in that Maryland game is probably unrealistic, which means the next guy who's got to step up is Emmett Holt, and that means he's got to do something like he did tonight, 8 points, 4 boards in 15 minutes. He may have to play 20, 25 minutes and up that to 10.6 boards, something like that. The question is, can he do it? Is he ready for that level of consistency? So I want to get both your guys' opinion. Andy, we'll start with you. In terms of how, if we assume that Hunter isn't going to play against Maryland, which I think is a safe assumption, how does that affect Indiana on the court and specifically in this matchup?
Well, I think this is a case where, normally you would go back to, well, here's how, this was, one of Hartman's better games, and his presence early in that first Maryland game where he hit those threes really caused Maryland to adjust and allowed IU to spread the floor and open up so many of the things that went well. The problem is that, as you mentioned, both, just before and immediately after his recent injury, he just doesn't feel like he's been the same guy. And so I think that is where, you would normally turn. I think you can't really go that route tonight. Holt at least has been getting pretty consistently double-digit minutes here over at least the last few games. Played 10 against Iowa and had 4 points, 5 rebounds. Played 13 against Michigan State, didn't really do a great deal, and then had 8 points, 4 boards in 15 minutes tonight. They're going to have to try to find a way to get probably 15, 18, 20 minutes out of him, I would guess, in that scenario. And I think he showed that he can play well at times. He hasn't been great, and he didn't play at all in the second Maryland game. And in the first one, played 9 minutes, missed both shots, and had a rebound, didn't score. So not a great track record against that team, but I do think he's been playing well lately. I do think he has good instincts. And quite honestly, he's not a guy, even though it felt like he made a few timely baskets in this game, he's not a guy that IU needs to score. They really need him to rebound. I mean, we saw tonight and in so many of these other games recently how important rebounding is to this team. So if there's any place that he can really help out, it's got to be on the boards and keeping second chances away from Maryland, generating an extra possession or two for IU, and going at it that way. The good thing is that Maryland doesn't have a guy they throw the ball into the post in with regularity. So any of his challenges defensively in the post based on giving up a couple inches to guys shouldn't really come into play. So I think if they can try to get 15, 18 minutes out of him, that's probably what they'd like to do. Maybe they get 20 because he's playing well. But I think Hartman really becomes a guy who's gotta find a way to summon what he had earlier in the year. I think he's going to be really critical of that game. And if there's a guy that you point to that's going to swing that game one way or the other, it's him, and probably Troy, who I know we'll touch on here briefly. But I think he and Troy are the two guys who are really going to be the things that decide the Maryland game.
Right. Yeah, I really liked what I saw from Holt today. I mean, the thing we've said all year about him since his first minutes of the season were he's just a solid basketball player. He does things that are smart, and he knows how to play the game. When he gets the ball in the post, he doesn't just immediately throw up a shot. He'll position himself better and stick it off the glass, and in that way, he's kind of the anti-Troy Williams in some ways. I mean, he makes the solid, smart play at all times. I mean, look. Troy making the spectacular play is great. I mean, I love it. But sometimes you'd like him to sort of slow down a step and do the smart thing. And I think you see that from Emmett Holt. And I thought you saw it a lot today. I mean, he's 6'6". He does have freakishly long arms, but he's only 6'6", and Ola is 7 feet tall. And you've got him just in there getting the ball and finding room to put it up off the glass and in. And he played an excellent game. He fought for offensive rebounds. He had 3 of them. He got a defensive rebound. He had an assist, a steal. I mean, he was just playing there, playing hard, doing the smart things he needed to do. We can work on, developing a jump shot and things like that in the offseason. Right now, what we need from him is just to make the smart basketball plays close to the basket, and he's been doing that lately. I think that he's really stepped up his game today. So I agree with Andy. I think that it's going to be on Hartman tomorrow, and I think that you're going to see Holt see extra minutes, but I think Hartman's going to take that starting spot.
So I thought the one glaring negative individually was Troy Williams today, and this is a guy who in the first Northwestern game had 21 points and 14 boards. I predicted before the game that he would exceed that combined total of 35 points and rebounds combined. I thought he would exceed that, and that James Blackman Jr. would not have a good game. So it shows you how poorly I predicted this game. Although I did get the outcome right.
You really got drunk with power after that Yogi prediction in the Maryland game. It really. At that point, you're like, yes. Oh, what else can I throw out?
Yeah. Let me just start predicting things. Hey, this team is peaking at the right time. Yeah, I know. Ever since that was Indiana's high point, and it was my high point. So I've kind of gone like the Hoosiers have gone. But in all seriousness about Troy, this is a good and a bad. I mean, you look at the first few possessions coming out of halftime, and it was the Troy show for better or worse. I think the first 5 possessions, there were 2 Troy turnovers. He had a missed 3, which I don't know why he took. And then he redeems himself with this great follow-up, and then he completely saved a possession with a Denzel Valentine-like hustle play that Robert Johnson hit for a 3. And so it was a completely inefficient 5 possessions, and yet he still contributed to Indiana extending the lead. And I feel like that's what this game was for Troy. I thought his decision-making on offense was atrocious. I thought he actually got lost on defense some and bailed himself out with a couple of those blocked shots. But the thing he did was he played his ass off. And so his decision-making was poor. I thought he was out of control. He wasn't converting around the basket. He was only 3 for 9. But it just goes to show you that when you play hard and you're active and you combine it with his athletic ability, you can still be productive. And so he finishes with 7 points, 12 boards, 5 offensive, and 3 blocks. And, it was just such a mixed bag. I thought he played poorly, and yet this poor game for him still, I think, contributed positively to Indiana winning. I think we just need him to dial in his decision-making a little more on offense for that Maryland game, because I don't think we'll have quite the margin for error in that game that we did today. Quick thoughts from both of you on Troy. Andy, you first.
Yeah, I definitely think the rebounding was a positive. That's a thing that has really been hammered home after the Iowa, Michigan, and Michigan State games with how bad this team was on the boards. And so, he got back to what he had done, with 12 rebounds tonight. And really, other than the Michigan State game when he only had 3, he's been pretty consistently getting 7, 8, 9, 10 rebounds. This was the 4th game out of the last, kind of eyeballing it here, maybe 10, 12 games where he's had double-digit rebounds. So I think that's positive and going to be important tomorrow. But yeah, I thought it was kind of an uneven performance, the thing that he had gotten away from a bit as he, was in the midst of the conference season, and now this is 3 straight games where he scored in single digits, and in those games is 8 for 26, I think, from the floor, doing some quick addition here. So it's definitely something that hopefully got out of the system tonight, because he's been really good against Maryland. He had 16 points and 7 boards in the first game, 17 and 10 in the second, and I think those are the kinds of numbers that he's going to have to put up tomorrow, in addition to playing some good defense. I thought the block shots was good. I think, at least one of them was, a bailout from him, but I think in some cases he's a guy who's not going to block a lot of shots for the guy that he's guarding. It's more in help defense situations. So maybe I'm talking myself into this, but I'd like to think that's a little bit better awareness from him defensively of where he can go over and help out other guys. So I would totally agree with your assessment of his performance. Really uneven, and I don't think IU can sustain that kind of performance from him tomorrow night.
Hey, Ryan, let me lead you into talking about Troy with this. A question from Dan Schilling, who asked, why is Troy missing so many shots inside 5 feet the past 4 or 5 games? Because I've noticed that too. And, I mean, he was a guy who was leading the Big Ten in field goal percentage for a while. I don't know if he finished like that, but do you see any reason? I mean, I think part of it is poor shot selection, and he's taken some wild shots, but do you see anything deeper there?
Some of that is luck. I mean, if he was making turnaround hooks early in the season, he's not now. That's not really... I mean, that's probably poor shot selection to begin with, and now they're just not going in as much. But I think also he's getting harassed more when he's going to the hoop. Not necessarily fouled, but guys are getting in his way. People are more aware of him, and, he's somebody you have to game plan for, as opposed to early in the season, he was just a big wild card. You didn't know what you were going to get. So I think that, guys are more aware of where he is on the floor, especially with guys like James Blackman Jr. and Robert Johnson taking a step back. Over the last couple weeks, I think you're starting to see more pressure on Troy to score at the hoop, and you're seeing guys, go after him instead of just sort of waiting to see if he misses the shot, or maybe having one guy challenge instead of now you're seeing 2 guys go up and challenge him. I think it's a couple things, but also you're right. I think it is poor shot selection at times. He's not getting the driving lanes that he was earlier in the year. So I think that also has a big plays a big role in it. But he's also the kind of guy who tomorrow could come out and make 8 of 10, by driving straight at Des Wells might be on him or one of those Maryland guys. I mean, it really depends. It's all on Troy. If he can maintain possession, continue to improve his ball handling, and just go straight at guys, he's going to be successful, even if he misses some easy shots at the bucket. Today, luckily enough, we were able to clean up some of his misses and get some offensive rebounds. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow, so he'll need to be more efficient.
Yeah. I love our buddy J-Hub sent in a quote-unquote question with the assembly call hashtag. I don't have a question, just stoked about this victory. Looking forward to another tomorrow. I like your attitude, J-Hub. You and I see eye to eye. Let's go into some final thoughts because, frankly, I'm anticipating a long run through the weekend, so I feel like the three of us should pace ourselves. It's not often that we get to do 2 shows back-to-back, but certainly we will tomorrow, win or lose, and hopefully it's win, and so we'll have another one on Saturday, and who knows, maybe we have to have that crazy dilemma where we figure out if we do a show or just wait for the selection show on Sunday, but let me not get that far ahead of myself. Let's take this Maryland game first. So, Andy, final thoughts for you. Ryan, your final thought, and then I'll shut us down.
Yeah, I think it was certainly a positive performance, a good bounce back from IU after the way the regular season ended, and maybe you're right, just getting away from the cloud that seemed to be hanging over everything in Bloomington will do these guys some good, and certainly from an effort standpoint, that really I continue to go back to that. They play as hard as they did defensively in the first half in some of these other games, and we're not in the conversation of having to root against random SEC teams to feel comfortable that IU is going to get in. So unfortunately that's where we are at this point, so that's what we'll continue to do. But I think there's this kind of effort, and hopefully they see it, could have prevented the slide that they've been in and that this game hopefully took them out of. So as we talked about heading into it, the draw setup, Maryland is a really good team, so certainly by no means are any of us saying that this is going to be a game that IU is definitely going to win, but from a ranking matchup standpoint of the top 4 seeds, they're easily the one that would have floated to the top of the list based on how IU's played against them so far this season. So I think the other good thing for this team that has seemed to lack confidence at times is that's absolutely a team that they should come in with some confidence against, both because of the way they played tonight and also because of the way they played against Maryland so far this season. So I think Blackman was a huge key tonight, stepped up, played really well. Yogi had another solid all-around game, and I think it's just going to need to be more guys getting into the same mix tomorrow because it's a much taller test against Maryland, shaping up to be without Hunter. I like you. I can't see any way that he would play. So, guys on the bench are going to have to step up and give a few minutes. Guys like Stan are going to have to come in, who had, much to probably Jerod and I's delight, a really good play that he followed up by chucking the ball into the center of the court and having it intercepted. So he had that. Hotzel came in, jacked up a couple terrible threes, so hopefully those guys got a couple of those plays out of their system because, if we think this team is going to make a run through this tournament, you're going to need guys in a scenario where you might have to play 4 games in 4 days. You're going to need to get contributions from guys off the bench, even if it's in, small spurts. So that'll definitely be the one thing to look for is, who steps up on the bench, because now you're taking Hartman, who wasn't overly productive tonight, but likely inserting him into the starting lineup. How do you get some other, production and quality minutes off the bench? It will be the other thing to look at. But I still go back to, can Troy play as well as he, has in the other Maryland games? Can Hartman rekindle a little bit of what he did in the first game? I think those guys are going to decide it. There might be some fluctuation between the guards of IU in terms of who does what, but I think you can count on some combination of those guys to play well. And I'm hoping that Zaislov left a few bullets in the gun, since he didn't really shoot too many threes tonight, that he's got a few left for tomorrow as well. It should be a good game. Both those Maryland games have been entertaining and fun to watch. So I think it should be a good basketball game, and hopefully we're back to talk about another good win and IU locking up a bid to the tournament.
Hey, real quick, the KenPom projection is out. You want to take a quick stab at what his system projects?
Well, I already have it in front of me. So if Ryan wants to guess, he can. But
Never mind. Ryan, do you want to guess?
I'm going to play with integrity here, so I don't want to. Throw anybody off.
The prediction for the final score, or
Yeah.
prediction.
And who
Okay.
wins and the confidence
Just 2
level.
wins in the margin. Don't make it too hard to make them pick the score. Jeez.
No, I know. That's what I meant. I'd say Indiana
If
by
you,
one.
if you get any part of this wrong, you're off the show. So don't screw up.
Okay.
Indiana by
All right.
one with a 30% confidence rating.
You're kind of right. You're kind of right because he's got Maryland 74-72, but we've seen Yogi miss enough threes at the end of the game that I'm pretty sure the next one he shoots is going to go in. So if Indiana's predicted to lose by 2, I say they win by 1. So that's kind of how I saw the prediction.
For my final thought, I will say that my day started great. My best friend and his wife welcomed their first child into the world, Henry Robert McKenzie. So hats off to you, Henry the First. And it continued with this win. I think it was really an excellent game. And you know what was the best part was seeing them come out on fire with a sense of urgency and really playing hard, not playing like the season was already over. And maybe a few days off has really helped this team. And but they're thrown right back into the fire tomorrow. As Andy said, these 2 games with Maryland have probably been the most entertaining of the year. Just great college basketball games. And yes, I'm counting the first one that was a blowout as a great college basketball game because that was just fun to watch. But I think that this team knows that it can beat Maryland and knows that it can have confidence going into that game. And again, thank the seeding gods that it worked out this way for us. That other teams lost and fell when they shouldn't have, or won early in the season, or what, to work out. So we got Northwestern and then Maryland before facing anyone else. And so I think that it's a huge game. We all know that. If they win tomorrow, I think we can all agree they're comfortably in the tournament, and we don't have to sweat out another Selection Sunday. But here's hoping that they come out tomorrow with the same aggression, the same fire, and Maryland, a team that's safely in the tournament, maybe just doesn't come out, can come out flat, and we can surprise them, run right by them.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the question is which Indiana team shows up. Is it the team that we saw tonight that just looked like they were shot out of a cannon and played that way for the whole first half and then cruised a little bit in the second half but still played well enough and smart enough and hard enough to get the win? Or do we fall back into the bad habits of the previous 120 minutes of basketball that we've seen from this team, which frankly has not been that good? So, Stan Robinson, who only played 7 minutes tonight, apparently was one of the players who came out to talk to the press, and he said that Indiana wanted to send a message that we're here to turn it up in the tournament, and they certainly did that. And that's the thing with this Indiana team, and it's been the frustration, but also the source of hope and optimism, I think, for a lot of us, is that you look at this team, and you've got a couple of McDonald's All-Americans. You've got a lot of really good recruits. There's a lot of talent there, despite how imperfect the roster construction is. And you just look at it and you say, man, if this team just plays hard, if they figure out the next gear, they could be really good and really consistent. And we've seen the flashes of it. We've never seen it consistently. And so I think that's what probably smartly keeps a lot of us, from fully embracing what we saw today and keeping it a little bit at arm's distance, just because it's like, okay, this is what we've been wanting to see. We haven't seen it consistently. But it's the kind of performance that you want to just embrace because it's a kind of performance that makes you proud of this Indiana team and makes you really confident in what they can do. And so I think none of us knows what's going to happen tomorrow, which team is going to show up, but you certainly have to be buoyed by this performance today, have a lot more confidence in what can happen tomorrow by what we saw today, not just the fact that Indiana won by double digits, but how they did it. And if Indiana can come out with that intensity and rally around itself, even if Hunter can't play, they certainly should have confidence because this is a Maryland team that they dominated once and should have beat another time. I think we all left that game feeling like we left a loss on the court, and now we're on a neutral court. It's a team we're plus 17 against them this year. So you think on a neutral court we should be able to beat them. Let's hope so, because if Indiana can do that, I think they secure their spot in the NCAA tournament, and then who knows what can happen in the weekend for the Big Ten tournament. But for one night, after 2 straight weeks of just not having really anything positive to talk about, anything good to feel about this team really gave us something to feel good about tonight. So for the team, for everybody, enjoy this for tonight, and then let's get up tomorrow and hope that the team has another one of these type of performances in them. Because if they do, they certainly have the talent, the ability, and the matchup set up well for them to win that game tomorrow. Let's hope they do it. And, of course, after the game, we'll be here with another episode of the Assembly Call, assemblycall.com/live, and hopefully it's a victorious one. We'll talk to you then, everybody.